All right. I'm here with Karen Wampler, who is a department head at Michigan State University in a family science related department. And Karen is a good friend and a colleague, and we worked together at Texas Tech University for about 13 years or so, 12 or 13 years. But Karen is somebody in the field of marriage and family therapy who has kind of carved out a unique program of research, and I want to talk a little bit to you today, Karen, about how that process is. How do you determine what your program of research is, as opposed to perhaps just putting together a great research question for one study? Mm-hmm. So, do you have any thoughts on how that journey began for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, my family of origin is always the answer for me, but it developed. It was more. I can't say that I ever sat down and planned it out. It was more a development, and then I could see I could see the threads looking back on it. Mm-hmm. Like for me, it was always for me. I was trained in sociology and had a strong focus on the environment and systems and so on, but I didn't really get the idea until I was introduced to family systems therapy. And the basically nature versus nurture issue, like what do you bring into relationships that make a difference, and then what impact do the relationships have? And basically, moving from when I went to graduate school, it was like a big issue for me about whether to go into clinical psychology or to go into marriage and family therapy. And marriage and family therapy made so much more sense because I so much believed in the impact of the family and the environment over nurture, and of course in those days we didn't really talk about genetics much, but
over nature.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yeah, over nature. So, like when I look back on it, my dissertation was on ego development, looking at how couple interaction and ego development, which is something that Jane Levenger had developed. And trying to show that was it how the couple interacted, or was it their level of ego development? Later on, I moved in, and then related to that were measurement issues, because it was so hard for me how do you measure relationships? How do you get at that? Where you had all these measures on individual or intrapsychic, and so that was the other main theme for me. But every time, it would turn out to be nature. It was like what they brought into the relationship that seemed to make the difference. It was like the main effect. Mm-hmm. So I kept looking for different variables. I just couldn't give up on the fact that I knew that relationships changed people. Mm-hmm. I knew that therapy changed people. I saw the impact of family therapy on individuals and families and relationships. One of the main things that happened to me, too, was in graduate school, is learning about Bowen. And Bowen became mainly my main clinical theory. And that informed my research. Again, but you look at Bowen, and you look at Bowen and you think about, okay, when you get down to it, when he talks about differentiation, is he really just talking about an individual measure and how the individual relates to, affects relationships? I did when I was at University of Georgia, did a large study looking at how, again, it was the same thing. How do you have, like, measures of temperament in children, parenting, whole family measures, trying to, again, figure out that balance between what people bring into the relationship in terms of, like, individual symptomology, temperament in children. One of my first funded studies was looking at 17 hydrocorticosteroids in terms of a non-self-report measure of stress. Again, and then looking at couple interaction. So I had couples, and this was across the street. We had a box outside the Dawson Hall at the University of Georgia where people would do first morning urine samples and bring them in and deposit them in the box. And get couples to do that was quite a trick. But it was the same thing, same issue for me looking back on it. It was only later that I consciously learned, through a colleague in child development, Chuck Halverson, learned about research on attachment. I didn't really know about it. I hadn't really learned about Bowlby in school.
In the as a
As
sociology
sociology
student,
major, I didn't learn about
yeah.
Bowlby either, because it was my developmental colleagues that knew about it, and the whole thing with the adult attachment interview. And so for me, attachment made so much sense, and I'm so grateful to have had the time. A large longitudinal grant that I had was finishing up, that one that had all these multiple layers of measures. And just literally set aside took me about 2 years to read the attachment literature.
Mm.
And it was a very conscious decision, because the thing about the attachment literature, it fits with Bowen, and it's such a strong research base, and it's again the issue about, they have so many relational measures, like with parenting. It fits with something like that is something that you carry with you, like attachment style.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always tied to parenting or interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So the excitement of being able to start going to SRCD,
which is
the Society for Research in Child Development, which is a very research-based conference, very exciting conference. The excitement of reading that literature and to see, and for a family therapist, it's such a wonderful literature because it is based in child development, so it's interactional, it's based on observational research. And that is the kind of research that we can use as therapists, because our basic mode of functioning is what's going on between people that we can see in looking at processes. So to integrate attachment theory with Bowen theory was just amazing for me.
Was that the kind of thing that then kind of your research kind of took off from that point?
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't happen until you really immersed yourself. You talked about a 2-year process of immersing yourself in that attachment literature.
And also getting credibility in that field. Like, one of the things I did was to learn the adult attachment interview and learn the coding. And it's been very important for me as a researcher in marriage and family therapy to be connected to the outside world, to know the literature, like to know Phil and Carolyn Cowan and the kind of work they do and respect it, and then for them to respect my work and the work of other family therapists. So my whole base in family therapy training, my whole base in Bowen theory, my knowledge about observational research and coding made all the difference for me. Again, though, one of the hard things for me is that I'm always looking at across levels, the individual, couple, parents, parent-child, the whole family, and then the other thing is developing measures, observational measures that are useful to clinicians. So, I can look, and I haven't solved the issues about whether it's the individual or the relationships, and of course we all know it's both.
Which is the original question from
Which is
sociology.
the original question, yeah. But I've never bored with it, and but the more, it's classic. The more I know, the less I know.
The AAI, adult.
The adult attachment interview.
Right. That is a specific protocol that was developed
By Mary Main.
By Mary Main. Okay. And are there a number of people who are trained in this method and do these kinds of research? So do you follow one another? I guess what I'm getting at is you have an area of research, and yet there is a community of scholars who use the same instrument, and it's almost like a club of some kind, and you all follow each other or troubleshoot with each other.
Right.
And they're not necessarily just MFTs. In fact,
most of them are not.
Most of them are not MFTs. So it's interesting that you had to have this. You had this Bowen perspective, and Bowen talked a lot about differentiation. Have you felt like you've needed to be well differentiated in that, like to maintain an MFT identity and yet play at the table with people who are child developmentalists or developmental psychologists? Do they? I don't know if I'm even close to how you look at it.
Well, I think one of the struggles for me as a marriage and family therapist, and I see a struggle in our field, it's the differentiation is the I statement about what is it that I bring and how do I define what I bring. I think we're so used to eliciting that from, we're very focused on the family system. What can we do